Hello, Rebecka Thor. Thank you again for joining us. I'm very happy we connected, and we will click along our very interesting, because I know it will be interesting discussion. I will briefly introduce you, but anyway, as usual, we will give links and details about your work following this discussion. So you are a cultural policy expert, we will like, and a curator. You have experience in public and cultural rights. A very interesting profile, because in our project Nordic Insights, we very much we are very much interested in more than an artistic view on public art and monuments as such. You are actually you are within Swedish Holocaust Museum. You work there, and you are also offering our discussion from there. You are also in Swedish Art Council and Public Art Agency Sweden, so that people would have a very quick look at your in your background. I will just start with a very interesting concept that you proposed and researched, the post monument. So actually, if you want to a bit to explain this I would say conceptual framework, because maybe you will tell us how you also use it in a different not only research but also works that you follow. I found a very interesting article on this in Baltic World. This is a journal from the Center for Baltic and East European Studies at Södertörn University in Stockholm, because I think it's interesting. It's an interesting paper, and maybe people would like to follow also. So maybe you can tell us more about this concept, and maybe I will follow up with another question if you haven't already answered it within your answer. What is the difference between this type of monuments, post monuments, and other earlier approach to difficult heritage? So wrapping up, please, Rebecka, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So this concept really kind of came out of a research project, or two research projects that I was heading, or one that I was heading and one that I was part of. So the project I had for 3 years on kind of vulnerable memories, trying to understand how difficult heritage could be dealt with in contemporary monuments and museums and memorials in a Swedish context. That was the one project, and then I was part of another project called Distrusting Monuments, Art in the War and Former Yugoslavia, which actually is founded by CBIS, the Baltic Sea Foundation at Södertörn University. So within these two processes, I was looking at how kind of memory and commemoration is made in different ways. And when I was following the processes of creating new monuments in Sweden, which I did in this research project, 3 of them, that were both, from what I could see, kind of different in ways of how the processes were rigged. So the kind of everything leading up to the realization of the monument or the making of the monument, but also in kind of terms of their topics. So I was trying to find a way to conceptualize this, or to kind of frame this. So what is this kind of difference, and how can we understand it? And as part of this project, I was a visiting scholar at Columbia University with Marianne Hirsch in New York. And she famously had this notion of post-memory, so how memory is inherited through generations as kind of lived memory. And her notion of post is not only the way of how we kind of see post, when we say like post-war or post-communist or post-modern or whatever post, that it's just an after, but how this post is always connected to the thing before and kind of intrinsically shaped by it. Of course, we cannot understand the postmodern if we don't understand the modern, right? It's not that complicated. It's just a way of framing the protest not as something disconnected afterwards. So that was one path of inspiration, and the other one was how she talks about vulnerable time, which is a theoretical concept that also was very important to me, where she kind of differentiates vulnerable time to trauma, because trauma is something that happens and that has kind of a clear end, whereas this vulnerable time has an open-endedness. So these two kind of Marianne Hirsch concepts I brought with me into these very concrete processes of these monuments. So if, to make it a little bit less abstract, one can take primarily two examples of monuments that I followed the processes around, and one was an anti-racist monument in Malmö, and one was an LGBTQI plus monument in Gothenburg. So I can talk more about these monuments. So let's start with the Malmö one. It was an initiative by 5 activists or local members. It began as a response in 2019. They made an article in the local newspaper saying, we should have a kind of memorial or monument commemorating the victims of this racist mass shooter called Peter Mangs, who was shooting people in Malmö for over 10 years, so a decade. And the police kind of failed to recognize the racist motif in this. They saw it, they didn't see the pattern. They saw it as kind of, I don't know, gang organized crime, or somehow not kind of see the structural part of it. So this monument began in a kind of response to this, but very quickly developed to be an anti-racist monument. So not a memorial to these people, but kind of a monument that both kind of acknowledge, remembers people in a very general sense that have suffered from racism in a very kind of undefined way. But they also kind of framed it as a way to create a site for resistance, for struggle. So the monument has both this kind of commemorative aspect and this future-oriented aspect, which of course is, that's true for very many or all monuments, one could say. But that the subject in itself is kind of, if you compare it to a monument for, I don't know, the victims from the Estonia catastrophe, for example, it's a very clear who is being commemorated here. And both in this sense, this instance, and in the one in Gothenburg, it's much more open. So what is actually being honored, commemorated, future-oriented? So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is, of course, what it means for the city, the municipality, as a kind of abstract perpetrator of this racist regimes, the police being part of the public life or official parties, to be the one leading these processes, to kind of take responsibility for this type of violence or this type of difficult past, and be the one saying we should make a monument, or we will fund this monument, because that was what happened in Malmö, that the city responded saying, okay, we will make this monument. And then in turn, of course, this process, this call for the monument was in 2019, and the monument will be inaugurated this spring, so in 2026. So it's a long process, many years. And it's been a kind of winding road, but it's also been a type of process which is very much more elaborate than just, let's make an open call and build a statue. So this is true also for the process in Gothenburg. They're very similar. So that the city curators decided to make like what they call a pre-study, where they invite artists to make temporary works. And they had, in Malmö, they had a kind of public art exhibition called The Entire City is a Monument, with both kind of physical works, but also, city walks. So 6 different artists, I think, that I have to check, were invited to make different works, kind of corresponding to this theme. And they also had a kind of very elaborate program of public talks. So how you kind of rig the process as a kind of long learning process before you even get to making the open call for the monument. So these were the kind of processes I wanted to capture. And as you read in the article, and I also have another article which is very similar, a little bit longer, in a Polish journal. I can send it to you. But it's almost the same. Where I kind of try to conceptualize how we can understand these processes that's then different from what would be the kind of, the big 90s concept of counter monuments by James Young. Because in a way, these are, of course, counter monuments as well, very obviously. But I felt there was also something else kind of going on here. So I wanted to actually just try at this concept. Can this be a fruitful way of thinking? And can such concept help us understand something more? And I don't know, I can tell you briefly about the LGBTQI monument in
Yeah.
Gothenburg as well, if
Yeah,
you
yeah,
want.
sure, because it wraps up quite interesting this idea of not only putting commemoration, but also more than that, so that people that are not only the victims can find themselves there. So I think it's a
No. So yeah, that maybe just before I go into Gothenburg, maybe a very important point to add with Malmö is that already in these kind of learning process, there was also a close conversation with the Department of Education in the city. So this is also an important thing, that this monument should really not be only about remembrance or about the victims. It should be a site. They want to develop an educational program that teachers can go there with children and talk about racism. So it should also be, it's very future oriented, and it's very much about the will not just to commemorate the past, but to change the future. And that is also very true for Gothenburg. So the process in Gothenburg began quite similarly. The city has a LGBTQI plus council. So it's not, they don't have a mandate of decision, but they have some kind of, a council, advisory function within the city. So they made a suggestion to make a monument commemorating or celebrating the LGBTQI history in Gothenburg. In Sweden, Gothenburg was during the 90s or 80s, even 80s, I think more, known as, it's a very particular concept in Swedish. It would literally translate as the gay punching city, or gay bögknackarstaden is the word. So bög is the male gay, and knacka is kind of a slang for, to knock somebody down, actually. So knacka and knock is the same word. So the gay knocking city. So it has a kind of violent history. It also had a lot of gay clubs and a gay community, which then was kind of reacting upon. So this monument, I would say, is even more, it's very similar in the way of, who is it actually commemorating? What is this memory actually? Is it the memory of the violence, or is it a celebration of the presence? Or I would say it's both. It has this very double function. And of course, as there are people of color in Malmö, of course, there are a lot of gay, LGBTQI population in Gothenburg still. So it's also kind of maybe an important kind of overarching aspect. So what does it mean to actually commemorate someone or something which is still a kind of living presence in the city? Because normally we commemorate somebody who died or somebody who's missing or, some kind of absence, but this is not an absence. This is very much part of the city fabric still. So in Gothenburg, it began as this proposal from the LGBTQI Council to the city, and the city said, yes, we will do it. So similar in that way, the municipality. They also did invited artists along the way to do different works. They have a very good homepage. Both monuments have very good homepages where you can find all the details of what the artist did and so on. So I don't have to go into detail about that. And that monument opened in, if I don't misremember, I think it was in November 2024. So it's still think it's the newest monument in Sweden so far until the one in Malmö opens in the summer, or this year at least. And with that monument, you can also see very clearly how it's the way it is constructed. That also, or the way it's it's taken form. It's by an artist called Connie Larsson, and Connie made this. So it's the monument consists out of 3 floor plans. So one on the ground is a floor plan from a dance floor from a nightclub, a gay nightclub that was very close by. It's on the plaza called Esperantoplatsen in Gothenburg. And the second layer is the floor plan of a kitchen of a radical lesbian collective in Gothenburg in the 1970s. The club is a bit later. And on top is a very small floor plan from a bedroom, which was a known kind of cruising site in the early 20th century for male homosexuals. The monument has very many different layers. It also has like a bronze outline around it, which resembles or is the equivalent length as the first kind of gay protest march in Gothenburg. There are some trees. The monument is called the Glade, so kind of resembling these kind of male cruising spots that encounters happened in the bushes or in the trees. So kind of wanting to create a structure of trees that kind of surrounds the monument. So the monument is, and then there's pillows, marble pillows on top of these floor plans, which are also heated, and has this kind of conceptual background where the artist asked now living queer people to send in photos of their pillows that they slept upon, and then he formed them after this. But if you look at the monument, it is somewhat of a stage. You can sit on it, you can stand on it, you can kind of interact with it. So it's very far from, this statue sculpture kind of. So also very much trying to be this place of interaction where you can be or do, which of course is something you can see in very many contemporary monuments around the world, that they are built in this way. The one in Malmö, interestingly enough, is not like that. It's called Master Narratives. It's much more of a sculpture. It also has these kind of inclusive processes, or what to say. The monument is bronze. How would you call them?
Like spikes, like
Yeah, spikes, exactly. Sorry, I couldn't find the word in English. So bronze spikes, and which together carry the big stone. But beneath that, there will be a box buried where children's or young people's memory or experiences of racism, they get to write notes, and then they will bury these notes. So that will be kind of hidden or buried beneath the monument. So it also has this kind of interactiveness, but of course, as it has, the form it has is not interactive in that direct way as the one in Gothenburg, that you can actually sit on it or do something, you know, be on it. You can be next to it, but not in it in the same way. So these kind of processes were what kind of draw me to this concept. It's also, I was also researching a third monument in Gothenburg that never was realized, which had to do with the Swedish colonial history, which might or might not become some kind of public artwork. So it's also kind of an interest in what does it actually mean to signify something as a monument and not as a public artwork. So what kind of, what does the concept carry? And why does it matter at all what we call it? And I, of course, would argue that it has to do with kind of taking responsibility for history and kind of claiming that it is much more than something that can be discarded just as a sculpture, that it has to do with the society we are and want to be.
Very interesting, because this difference I would like to address between public art and actually a monument. So and maybe to just ask you, do you think a monument, a contemporary one, should address only vulnerable memories or grievability or something bad that happened and must be taken out of the flow of history and mark it in the public space where people go and do their everyday routines? So enough, because you mentioned that it's not only about the past, but it's also about the future. So actually this point of discussions is almost never touched, in at least in our spaces in Romania and Republica Moldova. So actually monuments are thought to celebrate, commemorate something in the past, usually or almost always telling something about a glorious thing. I mean, even if it's about painful memories, about something epic, or a person that has done so many things for the nation or for so actually that's why I found it very interesting, this idea of way of learning process and the connection with the educational department, which is kind of, oh yeah, of course you do that for children, because actually why would you erect something very visible in the public space only for the adults or only for those who lived it and lived past it? So yeah, maybe we can
Yeah, so maybe first, during my time when I worked at the Public Art Agency, we did a book called Public Art, Public Memory, which is also published in English, which I would recommend. I have a short text, but there's also several other good texts in there. I can connect you to the Public Art Agencies to make sure they get you a copy as well. Because I was thinking, because in there, in this short text, I address exactly this difference between public art and monuments. So, very foundational for art, the fine art, the contemporary art, is that it should not have one kind of designation or purpose. And I would say this is the kind of main difference from the monument. The monument always have a given framework, a purpose. It has to do something particular, where the artwork can do infinitely many things, right? Of course, if you work with public art, that public art is also more steered than fine art in general. Of course, there is always some kind of commission behind it. But it still has a kind of different openness than the monument has. the monument is, very much designated to do in main one thing. Then the thing, of course, if the thing is to address anti-racism or to be an anti-racist monument, then of course that could mean very many different things, but still the monument is supposed to be an anti-racist monument. It's not supposed to be whatever the viewer kind of feels when I'm directing with it. So I think that's kind of one important thing to think about contemporary monuments in relation to contemporary art or public contemporary art. Then I think towards the different, the next question, I think it has to do with partly kind of different national histories. This research I have done, kind of diving into difficult memory or difficult heritage in Sweden, has very much to do with the kind of Swedish national narrative of, we've been a country of peace for 200 years, we're this kind of moral superpower, we're a very good force in the world, we're a good nation. We didn't have almost any colonies, we were not part of the Second World War, we were not. So this is very much, especially when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, this was very strong, this idea that, we don't have a difficult past. We don't have a big, patriotic national past either. We just have like a good past somehow. Of course, this is a bit, I'm joking a bit or being a bit sarcastic about it, but somehow I think this is very true for the national self-image of Sweden. For example, when there was a big debate there was a new monument celebrating kind of famous cabaret or actors in Malmö, and they made shoes along kind of a canal in Malmö, and it very much resembles the Holocaust Memorial in Budapest. It looks almost the same, but this is like a celebratory monument over actors and cabarets, a very happy memorial. And when I was being interviewed by this, because me, among other ones, said, this is a weird resemblance, what does this actually mean to make a monument which looks like a Holocaust monument commemorating people that were shot and fell into the Donau, and then have this, Malmö is a city of like happy theater and musicals and cabarets. And the interviewer for the Swedish public radio said, but we don't see that because we don't have a history of war in Sweden. We have not experienced war. And I think this is also something very telling, because this idea of the we, that Sweden still is a very homogeneous country, especially in Malmö, which has a very, very big immigrant population. But still this notion is so strong that, we as a nation don't have any relationship to this at all. So with war in general, with the Holocaust, this is also something we meet a lot at the Holocaust Museum. Still the notion that the Holocaust kind of happened to somebody else, somewhere else, and Sweden had no part, even though Sweden was one of the few countries in Europe which actually kind of doubled its Jewish population after the Holocaust. So of course, there are many families that were directly affected of the Holocaust in Sweden as well. So this is kind of the background to why I wanted to do this research in Sweden, because we don't, what you're describing in Romania, I think it's different. We have these sculptures to the Swedish kings, but they're old, nobody really knows who these kings were, they're not, they're very invisible, as one also speaks about monuments a lot, or the Robert Musil, nothing is as invisible as the monument in public space. So I saw these processes as the kind of the first time Sweden tried to grapple with this kind of more difficult past, even if it's a very contemporary past, in public space. Which is also, we're building a Holocaust museum now. It's open in 2022. Much later than, there are a wave of new Holocaust museums happening around Europe and the world right now, but the most museums were built in the 90s and early 2000s. So this is also kind of a part of it, that like, why is it that we're now in Sweden trying to talk about this? And you can have many different answers, I would say. One is very much a kind of effect or response to the Black Lives Matter protest, which did not reach Sweden so much, but partly there was a discussion about one particular or two particular monument statues that should they be taken down or should they not be taken down. But I think the idea that kind of add other monuments that function in another way was some kind of response to this. Of course, the anti-racist monument began in 2019, so that was before BLM, but I think, they still have to be understood within the same kind of global context, where the roads must fall, that began earlier in South Africa and so on. So this kind of idea of, who is being represented in public space, what kind of histories. And in Sweden, all these kind of more difficult sides has been very, very invisible. Yeah, I don't know. Now maybe I lost a little bit track of your question. I'm talking so much, but
it's very good because we were making these differences between public art and monuments, and yeah, if monuments are always charged up with painful memories or vulnerability or grief, so if these post monuments, or why not counter monuments, would be actually a counterpart of these glorious monuments, and actually showing that the monument can actually show that it was nothing glorious about that, and actually what would be glorified would be the victim themselves or the people that suffered, and adding up this educational part and the forward-looking, future-looking part that you very well mentioned. So actually, I think this is very interesting from a point of view of how would you commission something like that? What would be a difference, brief between a public art approach and a monument approach? And I very much enjoy the idea of this process that actually involved temporary art idea. So actually, you are proposing, you are not thinking, oh, am I the artist or the group of artists that are to be chosen, but actually you are part of the process, and this is actually very welcoming. You are not thinking, oh, I will be replaced as an artist with another artist. So I think this is quite interesting approach in the way artists understand their role in an ongoing presence, so to speak. So yeah, I think we touched quite interesting things, but further on this idea of post monuments. So actually, maybe this is an open view, but what would you think it would be necessary in Sweden for, but why not if you can add some other research thought of yours? What do you think would be needed as a, why not as a future or a future to be monument, celebrating, memorializing, putting a pin on the map of the city about something? So how would you approach a monument that is to be built Yeah, what do you think?
So kind of, do you mean like a, I don't know how to frame it, like a positive monument?
Not necessarily, maybe
No, okay,
there is no need for any positive thing in the public
no.
space. Maybe you think we should be, I don't know,
No, I'm just, no, but I think maybe just kind of a few. I think it's interesting also. I would just add one thing to what we talked about before, and then I will go back to this. Both the monument in Gothenburg and the one, the anti-racist monument in Malmö, are now making books. So I wrote 2 texts this winter and fall for each book. The one in Gothenburg is actually called Why Call It a Monument, or that's the answer to it. And the one in Malmö is very much about the process. So I think these 2 books, but I think also both as a kind of source of knowledge for you, of course. I think these will be both translated into English as well, or I hope. I'm kind of sure they are, but never mind. But also that the book is a part of the actual process. So that the monument is not finished with the erection of the monument, but that you do these kind of pre-studies before you build the knowledge, and a knowledge outcome is also then to make a book afterwards. I think kind of what would differentiate these post monuments, or what to call them, from kind of the counter monuments from the 90s is that, of course, these offer kind of a critical narrative or a critical narration, but they are not counter in this direct way as kind of, for example, the Esther Schabelgeit's and Jochen Geit's anti-fascist monument in Hamburg, which is like reacting upon fascism. Then we make anti-fascist. This is not, of course, it's an anti-racist monument, but racism is not a singular thing. I don't want to simplify what fascism is either. It's not, but we can all kind of, racism is kind of present and functioning from the level of this kind of racial, racist mass shooter to kind of the everyday microaggressions, right? So they're not just countering one thing, they're kind of working. And I think, what they have also, which may differentiate them from the counter monument, is that they have the celebratory aspect as well, kind of offering a site not only for givability and painfulness, but also this kind of pride and joy and struggle and future oriented, way for people to identify or to be included in the monuments. For example, when the school children are brought or will be brought to the anti-racist monument in Malmö, if these school children then have a kind of immigrant background or descendants from somewhere else than Sweden, the hope is, of course, that this should be a site for recognition also for them. So I think they have, they deal with kind of vulnerable and painful memories, but they also have this kind of very celebratory aspect. Then other more monuments that could be, of course, you could imagine them being formulated even more future-oriented than they were. Both of them still kind of have a very strong foundation in this kind of difficult past. But of course, one could imagine another type of, even more future-oriented process. I would say, I would find that more difficult if, let's say that the city of Stockholm decides to do a monument for celebrating the LGBTQI monument, people of the city, for example. What would that mean if you would not recognize the repression and oppression that these groups have suffered. You know, and of course you have it, I don't know, in Sweden you have a strong tradition of naming streets after people. That is that kind of celebratory, very simple act. In one way you could say, you know, it's symbolic, it carries meaning in one sense, but it's also a very easy way for the city, for example, to say, you know, we have the Katarina Taikon alley. She was a famous Roma activist. Now we have this like little pathway named after her. See, we recognized her, you know. So I think it's something about finding ways of also kind of posing question. No, one can take another kind of recent monument example, actually commissioned by the Public Art Agency of Sweden, which was a commission from not the government, but the from the governmental body. I don't know how to exactly translate that concept into English, but it's in the book, so we can check it out afterwards. Celebrating 100 years of democracy in Sweden. So that was very much, you know, this kind of celebratory monument. And it's the monument in itself is a sculpture of kind of contemporary women carrying trays, and on the trays there are figurines of some of the kind of early suffragettes, the women who kind of pushed for the public vote, so the inclusion of women in the vote in the first election in 1921 was the year when women got to vote the first time in Sweden. So that was very much this kind of celebratory monument, and the artist kind of trying to add these kind of contemporary looking women, and it also has another layer of kind of service worker, like she mapped how service worker now move around as a part of this kind of democratic aspect of it. But you know, this monument, it's there, it's a celebration. I would say it has kind of a little impact. It of course could be activated also with programming and question, but if you don't kind of talk about it in, so you know, what does this democracy mean today? Why was it that there was no public vote for women before 1921? You know, what's then the point of it, right? Then it's just like, okay, we had democracy for 100 years. Okay, fine, let's get rid of it. And I think that's another kind of very important point for me with this monument, that they should not be considered a kind of closure. That like, now we dealt with this difficult past or this history, now we're done, now we can move on. But that actual erection or realization on site should be seen rather as some kind of starting point. So like, okay, now we have this site, how do we activate it? What do we want it to do in the public? Can we bring school children, for example? Can we, I don't know, use this as a stage? And yeah, and that I think you can also see in very many different processes. I don't know if you know Ulfa Minde is working on a kind of anti-racist monument in Cologne. So this way of also engaging the public or the local community to kind of create a kind of ownership over these sites, or so yeah.
Yeah, thanks. It connects well with my last question. Actually, it's about where you erect a monument and that's it. I mean, it's not a closure. Actually, is beginning the conversation as a conversation
Yes.
starter. So actually, this is I don't know, an aspect that maybe, I mean, not many people think about. I mean, we just put it there. But concerning monuments that are already in the public space and they get contested, they get contested because you also mentioned the Black Lives Matter movement and all those monuments toppling that it triggered around the world. What are your research thoughts concerning this type of monuments? Should they be just put it in a museum and there to begin the conversation, or they should just stay there in the public space? Because also museums, I consider them public spaces, but maybe more, I don't know, having a private side of it, because you have to be, I don't know, you have to buy a ticket to enter there to make an effort, but in the public space to just pass by. So how would you think these contested monuments that were not contested 10 years ago, but now they are? This is also a point of discussion. Why now? This question, with this question, we also begin this project. So why? I mean, why now? They were just fine there. Nobody cared about them. They were just people on horses or just half-body people staying in the parks. So how would you see those? How would you see contested monuments? How would you keep contested monuments conversation starters? And how maybe why not how you give them other meanings. So actually when you change the context, when you put them into museums and you put I don't know, you put text, you put other exhibits, so you change the context, then maybe the monument itself becomes something else. So
yes, no, I totally agree.
Because
I don't think there's like one answer fits all. I think it's very contextual. I think maybe some monument should be toppled and just made away with. I think otherwise, other monuments should be contextualized. You can do it both in public space, or in a museum. When, if we look at what has the kind of different approaches that had been taken, I think I can say quickly like 3 different examples that some positive and some negative. I think a very nice kind of guerrilla intervention was in South Africa after the toppling of one of the rose monuments. So only the plinth remained. And then a street artist drew like with spray color, like a shadow of the monument on the ground. So the monument was gone, but the shadow was still there. I think that was kind of a brilliant way of addressing, it might be gone, but the history is still here. Because of course, if we would just take them away and again say, okay, we just took them away, it's a closure, then it's totally pointless. It has to be the beginning of something. Then I think it was in Vienna where they kind of tilted a monument. I think that's not sufficient to just say, okay, it's not as it were, it's too intricate. It's, it might be a nice artistic gesture, but it doesn't do enough. And I think maybe it's a bit too easy then for the city as well to just say, we did something, we tilted the monument. And a third example would be, the work mainly by Tim Cole, a British public art historian, who worked with the Edward Colston statue in Bristol. That was toppled, it was thrown in the water during the BLM protests, but it was then brought up and it was brought into this museum in Bristol. And they kept it, they kept the graffiti on the monument or the statue of Colston. They kept it laying down, so it was like on his back instead of hovering above you. And then they made a public survey asking the people of Bristol, what should we do with this monument? And then, the majority said, let's keep it in the museum. Sorry, I'm getting all these chat notices that I'm trying to turn off. Let's keep it in the museum. but let's keep it in this way. So then, of course, as you kind of also addressed, they created a totally different context, which also then include the history of the toppling and the reason why it was toppled, etc., etc. That I think is a good approach for that particular monument. Maybe it's not for every monument. I think in Sweden was a discussion of, you know, adding an extra plaque next to the plaque. I think if you do that and then say, okay, we're done, it's quite a pointless. But I think it has to be a different kind of answer in different context of what to do. But I don't think the solution would be just to take all of them away and pretend that this kind of bad past did not happen. Because of course, this entire process was about recognizing a violent past. So how do you get that recognition? That should be the question addressed to these monuments as well. So how can we kind of address both that at one time these were thought as a glorious past, because of course the Colston or the roads or in the Confederacy statues were not put there to signify a violence towards somebody else. It was to signify the glorious past or an important person for the nation. So this question of why now? It's interesting. I don't have an answer. You know, maybe I know I don't have a good answer. You know, of course, it has to do with kind of post-colonial and decolonial thought, kind of reaching a certain state of kind of public knowledge or public recognition, where it kind of left the universities. And even though it was around very many universities, these kind of protests started. If you look at the Road Must Fall in South Africa, for example. But then I think what kind of triggered this kind of big global surge, I haven't researched it, and I don't have a kind of particular answer, but it is very interesting though, of course. Why did it happen at that time? And what do you say, what is, you know, because also, of course, as an answer to this, if you turn it around, my response, what to do with these monuments now, are in the context of the contemporary. But, you know, when you talk about monuments, very often you talk about like the different temporalities of the monuments. So it's kind of the time where they're made, the time that they're commemorating, and the time of the encounter with the monument. And the time of the encounter with the monument, you know, we look at it now from our contemporary gaze and situation. But how this would be viewed in 10 years, 15 years, or in 100 years, we don't know, because also the monuments, of course, carries this idea of permanency, that they should remain, that they are forever in a sense. Of course, they never are, but they have that kind of built into them as well. So, of course, how we see these monuments, you know, we know that very well. Look at Eastern Europe with all the kind of Marx and Lenin or Stalin monuments that were toppled and moved, like in Berlin, moved into a forest, you know, or a park. So that, of course, kind of hinges into a much bigger question of city planning and how a city acknowledges or remembers its past history. And that I think you can see not only in monuments, but also kind of how, you know, for example, how you kind of tear down brutalist communist buildings and replace them with, in Germany, for example, with like Prussian architecture to kind of eradicate a certain past, which is not seen as worthy of remembrance or but you know, that's also the question of cultural heritage, right? In Sweden, we even have like in the law we have now for cultural heritage, it says like the aspects of the past which are useful or valuable in the present. So what is kind of cultural heritage? That it's written in the idea of cultural heritage, this kind of gaze of the contemporary. And I think that's a very interesting thing, that cultural heritage is not what we kind of normally would think about it as, a kind of solid thing. You know, this is Stonehenge. It's cultural heritage, right? But the cultural heritage could be very many more things and very much more fluid, or
Yeah,
changing.
you touch upon a very interesting subject for a further project, maybe apropos identity, actually. I mean, because you also mentioned with the anti-racist monument that maybe children that were just born there or just came their first generation, they would feel comfortable there. But maybe if they were in their country, in their city, they would see completely different types of monuments. So
Yeah.
it's quite interesting, this point, and the second point that you mentioned quite well, and that we still feel it. So 30, almost 6 years from the revolution in Romania. So actually, we feel that this idea of this is worth called heritage, this is not worth called.
Yeah.
So actually, this means also heritage like artworks, but also heritage like buildings. So
Yes.
the buildings you just take it off and that's it, and it's only the photo memory of it. But for the artworks, maybe they are more like I don't know, if you consider them lucky, you can put it in a deposit and then the museum store it. And if they will stay there in good shape, and in 20 years we think that actually we should mention them, is not is a good heritage or a bad.
No.
It is the heritage, so actually
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
put it on. I mean, but interestingly enough, is this thing that actually we implicitly addressed, this idea, if it's something glorious marked out in the public space, is a pride of belonging. So actually, when you accept that your heritage is not so glorious or not so positive, the first thing is no, I mean, refuse it, because it appeals to something that you don't like. I mean, you don't like to see your grandparents being the bad guys. So
No.
quite interesting, this discussion about
Yeah.
how would you place a value on heritage from a contemporary point of view. And you are contemporary, but in 50 years you will be the past. So actually, maybe it would be interesting enough to have all these layers of ex-contemporary approaches.
Yeah.
And then you will see it in, I mean, these guys consider it okay. These guys, oh my God, this is, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
reflections, not
Yeah.
not ending points of discussion. So yeah.